Hey, everybody. How are you? I'm going to give it a second.
Everybody down here is very good. Yo,
Get on in here and get started. Uh, let's see. Hopefully this is working. We'll see in a second. I got a couple of things happening at the moment. So I'll give it a second for folks to get tuned in here. Make sure I have all of my stuff together on my end because right now it's not showing anybody. So let me just see. Hey, Addie, how are you? I'm going to make sure that I share this on my page too. So you guys give me just a second and we will kind of dive right in here. Lots of information for me to show you guys, like a lot of information. So I want you guys to just bear with me. And I'm going to have to cover something. Hey, Christy. Hey, Sunshine. Hey, Jamie. So I'm going to have to address something back home that has come up recently as well. And the reason why I need to do that is because a lot of people have been messaging me today with regards to what transpired at the Tennessee High School and David Crockett game that happened over the weekend. And so I want to address that situation really quickly. Holy crap, why is this not showing what I want it to do? Give me a second, guys. I need for this to load this back up because it is not. And I want it to not play yet. And it's going to as soon as I add it. So let me remove from stream. Boom. Okay, cool. So listen, so several of you have messaged me, and I was inboxed by a family member, one of Micah's family members. And so most of you all know that Micah is a Tennessee High football player that, hey, Verna, how are you? Who passed away at the lake during a swimming accident. And I'm aware that a bunch of things took place at the recent football game that happened over the weekend. Let me say this. I'm not going to cover all of it. I know some of you all have seen the post that I've been tagged in. The reason I'm not going to cover it yet is because Micah's family actually reached out to me, and I'm going to speak to them first and to some other people who were actually present, who were on the field, who were on the sidelines when all of these things took place before I address anything. Because other than that, first of all, let me just say this, guys. I don't speak to everybody that's on the broadcast, or I'd be doing that the whole time, right? So I do that briefly at the very beginning of this, and then I keep it pushing because I've got a lot of information to cover tonight that's really, really important. So if you are tuning in because you want to know like what did or did not exactly happen at that football game, the short answer to that is I don't know yet. And out of respect for the family, I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I don't know. And it's just too sensitive and there's too much. I will say this is the only thing I'm going to say about it. I'm hoping that that maybe some of this stuff didn't happen, although I'm hearing from a lot of people that it did. In addition to that, let me say this. Even if those things did happen, if I'm hearing other things about people being threatened, and that's not okay either. So if whatever side of the house you fall down on this, I want to be clear that I'm not advocating violence or threats in return for whatever did or didn't happen. Got it? So since so I wanted to address that so that everybody would kind of know and be okay and at least know that I addressed it. Okay. I'm adding a couple of things onto the stream as we're talking because somehow they got kicked out. So I want to talk about missing white woman syndrome today. And the reason, if you caught my live earlier today, the reason that I really wanted to hone in and discuss this issue is because I'm seeing a lot of information that's online based on the Gabby Petito situation and her going missing, the amount of media attention that it's received, and the difference between her and I've seen one particular meme where it's comparing her to a black girl from the Queens who went missing. And earlier today, if you caught my broadcast, hey, Teresa, earlier today, if you caught my broadcast, one of the things that you heard me say is that we don't always choose the right cases to bring up our valid arguments and valid situations, right? So, for example, in this case, talking about Gabby, right? Talking about Gabby Petito situation is not really the same because and here's one of the significant differences in that case, right? So she was someone who was traveling. She was a video blogger, and she and her boyfriend, they had social medias, and the statistics are hard to go back. I even went on a Social Blade to look at the number of followers that she had prior to going missing and after she went missing. I will say one of the distinct differences in her case is that folks on Instagram and TikTok decided that they wanted to become like true crime, they went after this. And I don't know, without the social media attention, if it would have gotten the attention, because Gabby had been missing since September 1st, when her fiance returned home by himself from their trip, right? And so I don't know, without the social media presence that happened, if law enforcement would have been as active, as fast, and as harsh, and had news media outlets not been the same. Having said that, are there racial disparities? Matter of fact, racial and gender disparities when it comes to missing and abducted persons? Of course there is. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The reason why I want to make sure that we address like the Gabby situation is, I feel like sometimes when we choose the wrong stories to make comparisons, right? We use the wrong stories, and then what we do when we do that is we dilute the factual evidence that exists that there are disparities. And so by people throwing up Gabby compared to this other girl, it's not the same thing. It's not comparing apples to apples, or even relatively close. Cyber sleuths. Thanks, Melanie. Appreciate that. And and when we do that, it takes away from the validity of the argument. Does that make sense, guys? So I want to talk first. I have been researching all day today. That's no joke. This is just part of what I highlighted and printed off. I researched an empirical study from Northwestern Law. And then I also researched another article from William and Mary that is on this issue. And it references several other studies at the same time. And I didn't have time to put all of these points from here into the comments from you, right? But that is why I printed it out, and I'm going to give you the links. Okay. So here's what we're going to talk about. When it comes to how many of you guys, let me ask you this. How many of you guys are aware or have ever heard of missing white woman syndrome? Has anybody ever heard of that before? If you have, just throw some comments in the box. If you've ever heard of missing white woman syndrome and the studies that have been done around it, for years now. And I mean, a couple of decades, right? I'm going to reference a couple of studies from 2000 to 2004, another study that's from 2013 to 2015, so forth and so on. So Sunshine says no. Melanie says yep. Jamie says no. Linda said never. I don't know who this name is, but I want my sauce says of course. Elizabeth says no. Okay, so it is this. Okay, so it is described as what makes the disparities that happen, that women and girls are represented as crimes in the media. And why is that? Why does that seem to be? And is that really the case? So when people have done studies about this, it's really a significant look at what happens. And so somebody mentioned this earlier today. Have you guys seen this clip from, I think, John Champion, who's a comedian friend of mine? He mentioned this clip from Patrice O'Neill from The Elephant in the Room, where he's talking about white women and the value of white women. Have you guys ever seen it? If you haven't, I would like to take 3, maybe 4 minutes of this broadcast to show it to you, because maybe it will help to approach this subject from a comical presentation than to just dive right into the statistics, okay? So here we go.
Congratulations to you, my friend. Look at that white woman you're with. God damn.
Some of you guys can hear it.
Behind you going, yeah, son, I'm with my girl, but yo, for real? That white woman's amazing, isn't she? Tell the truth. He's with his black girl for like, no, I don't know, but she's high level. That's a high level white woman right there. That white woman is man, oh man. Black women get mad at that, but that is top shelf white woman right there. You know how you can tell how pretty a white woman is? The value, you look at her and then you wonder how long they would look for if she was missing. Come on, take a look. Look at it. Look. I saw you look mad, sweetie. How long if you was missing? How long you think they were? Exactly. She went. You know the deal. I ain't saying nothing wrong. White woman's life is valuable. What's his name? Joran Vandersloot? Right? We find out he was a serial.
Well,
he kills women. That's what he do. He do it well. You know what I mean? We know the girl that he supposedly had. What's the girl in Aruba? Natalie Holloway, right? But the one he just killed, the girl in Peru. What's her name? Exactly. Look how fast you said Natalie. You said Natalie. Natalie Holloway. That angel. Y'all said that like Family Feud. All right, name a white girl been missing for 5 years in Aruba. Natalie Holloway. Survey said. A Peruvian girl that was killed yesterday.
So you guys get the point. He's making the point, the very obvious, real point that this guy, which we all know, right? He is suspected in the murder of Natalie Holloway, right? Suspected. And that's the one that got all the national attention, right? Hey, Mindy. But he actually did kill and was arrested for killing the Peruvian girl. But no one knows her name. No one knows who she is. No one knows what happened. No one knows whatever, because there was extensive media coverage of Natalie Holloway, right? So he's making this very real point that there is something that happens in the media. And why is that? Why does it happen? So I want to go ahead and give you guys a little bit of information. So the study that I want to talk about the most is the one from Northwestern Law. And I'm going to pop the link in here for you so that you can read it yourself. It's Missing White Woman Syndrome, an empirical analysis of race and gender disparities. Now, it does touch on, it does also touch on a little bit of the issue that comes up. I think somebody on YouTube mentioned classism, right? We do know that classism plays a role, but it's not as prevalent as the racial and gender disparities, okay? So let me give you this link. And that is to the article. I read it on another JSTOR website, but you have to subscribe to it. That website right there, you'll just be able to get straight to the PDF and you'll be able to read it for yourselves. What they did in this study was they wanted to look at the intersection of where gender and race collide and where they intersect when it comes to abducted and missing persons. They also wanted to take a look at two things in terms of the disparities in media coverage. They wanted to look at not just how often were the individuals who were missing and abducted, how often did they appear in the media, but they wanted to take a look at the intensity of the coverage, because that also matters. So follow me. The impact, if you make it into a news story and you make it into that news story one time and that's all that's featured, the amount of resources allocated and the amount of attention that you're going to garner is going to be significantly less than if you are mentioned day after day after day after day after day, which is what we saw with the Gabby Petito case, right? Am I making sense? Does everybody kind of follow me on that? So it's two things. It's not just how often are those cases actually mentioned in the news media, but at what level of intensity are they? So this study, it comes off, and in the very beginning, it mentions a couple of things. So there was a study that was done by Scripps Howard News Service. They analyzed CNN and the Associated Press. And what they found in these news reports pertaining to child abductions between 2000 and 2004 is that 162 Associated Press stories and 43 CNN stories dramatically overrepresented white children. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is when they looked at data from the Department of Justice and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, during that same time frame, the estimated number between 53 and 54% of missing children from that time frame were white, right? So 53 to 54% of the children missing during that time were white. However, in contrast, 67% of the Associated Press reports were white, and an even higher number, 76% of CNN's stories focused on white children. So follow me. If you have 53 to 54% of the abducted and missing children being white, but you have 67 and 76% of the stories that are actually being covered by national news outlets at 67 and 76% of white children, that means inevitably you have a disproportionate amount of Hispanic and Black and brown children that are being reported. I mean, the numbers just are what they are. Now, what's also interesting is about the FBI's database. The FBI database includes Hispanics in their white description when it comes to their crime database. So you'll hear them talk about in this, if you go on to read the article itself, the study itself, you'll hear them talk about how that kind of makes some of the numbers disproportionate. At the time that this research was done, the other thing that you'll find is that, do you remember when the 3 Hispanic girls were found in Cleveland that had been kept in the basement? Gosh, what's his name? Do y'all know the guy that I'm talking about in Cleveland, Ohio, where the 3 Hispanic girls had been abducted, had been kept prisoner, and they had escaped? During the time that this period of this study covered, it also included those 3 girls. Hey, Mindy B. And so it affected the outcome of these studies, of this study, just a little bit. Okay. All right. So I want to go. And this, I also found this to be interesting because we're looking at a couple of different things. We're looking at gender issues and we're looking at racial issues and where they intersect, specifically when it comes to missing and abducted individuals. Right. So when they were looking at, right, Ariel Castro. Thank you, Mandy. See, you got me. So here's what they've said. Okay, so numerous studies have concluded that whites are more likely than non-whites to appear in news stories as victims of crimes. So there's also this question about why is that, right? These findings hold even when accounting for how often different racial groups are actually victimized by crime, okay? So in other words, whites disproportionate overrepresentation and non-whites disproportionate underrepresentation in news coverage cannot be explained by differences in real world victimization rates. So if you actually looked at the rates, they don't account for why they're over or under misrepresented in the news media, right? So it's crazy. There's even little evidence that says that this is like more likely to receive media attention if it's a Black perpetrator. It doesn't even say that that's the case. It just is what it is. So they're guessing. So they're saying, so like, well, why is this? Why does this appear to be so? And so this is what we found. We have found that looking at victim perpetrator interplay, they've concluded that the media treats racial groups differently. So in general, persons of color are more likely than their white counterparts to be portrayed as perpetrators in news stories, with one study finding that, quote, violent crime committed by blacks was the largest category of local news among all types of stories, right? But one study also found that the black and Hispanic perpetrators were substantially more likely than the whites to be shown victimizing strangers, which perpetuates the fear, right? Researchers have also demonstrated that black suspects are more likely than their white counterparts to be presented in what authors deem threatening manners, in mugshots, or while being physically restrained in some way by the police, versus, say, being peacefully taken to Burger King, if you know what I mean, right? So when you start to get, now this one, some of you guys might not like some of the things that I'm about to say. I'm just giving you the information from the study, okay? So just follow me. We've already covered that in this Scripps Howard study, while 53 to 54% of the missing children from 2000 to 2004 were white, they accounted for 67% of the reports by the Associated Press and 76% of the ones by CNN, right? We've also talked about the fact that whites are 1.69 times more likely to appear as victims of a crime in a sample of national network TV segments. I can't speak. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about, though, is racial grammar. Has anybody ever heard the term racial grammar? You know, Wendy, just saying. So I had never heard the term racial grammar. So I went and I looked it up, right? So this is a professor, Eduardo Bonilla Silva, offers a more suitable theory for the racial component of missing white woman syndrome, because there's two components. There's the gender component and the race component, right? So he defines racial grammar as white supremacy that is normalized by implicit or even invisible standards. These standards, quote, reproduce racial order as just the way things are. So in other words, racial grammar reinforces the status quo and does so in different ways. To fully explain the concept, he turns in part to racial disparities in news coverage of abductions. And so this is in another, you can actually look it up in another study, but he says, he argues that missing whites dominate the news because others see them as universal beings. Put another way, people are, at least theoretically, able to identify more easily with and care more about missing whites than they are missing individuals of color. So this subtle standard of placing a premium on white lives in the news helps maintain a racial hierarchy with whites at the top. Got it? So what he's basically saying, let me make sure my daughter is good. Okay. So what he's saying is that there are these subtle, so think about it like this. When you read a news article, right, and it just says a woman was shot, da, 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 or a man was whatever, whatever, whatever. You automatically, when you picture that story, because we do form pictures when we read in our minds, right? The standard is that that's a white person because they're not identified as anything else. So if you read a news article and it simply says a woman or a man, right? The standard is that it's a white woman or a man. Because if it is not a white woman or a man, right, then they are identified as Black or Hispanic or whatever. It is exactly, Jamie, yes. White is the default, right? So, and that's what people have to understand. So that is the implied or, how can I say, it's the standard, right? So what he's saying is that this exists, racial grammar exists, and because it exists, it normalizes. Well, Deborah, I would say that you aren't very clear about what racism means. So if you believe that what I just said sounds racist, then you aren't very clear about what racism is. And what I would say that is your white fragility that makes it so. See, this is the thing. When you are used to being the default, when you are used to being the standard, when someone identifies you as white, if I start to address you as white people, right, then all of a sudden that sounds racist. But that's because you're just used to being people, not white people. So just being identified as white feels yucky to you. But yet, that's what Black and brown and indigenous people have dealt with their entire lives. Exactly, Linda. That's what we did. I have said that. I don't know about you, but I have always said that. So we're going to talk about this as I get more into like this issue, right? But we're not talking about. First of all, we want to talk about in this study the fact that yes, white women / girls tend to get the highest amount of coverage in media from abductions, but we also want to look at why and at what levels. And it's not just the coverage; it is. No, you are saying it's okay to interpret the person as being white by not stating. No, what I'm saying is that is the standard. Read your newspaper, Deborah. That's what I'm saying to you. So when you read your newspaper, wherever you're from at home, and you just read a normal story, and it's white on white crime, are the people identified in the article as the white killer and the white victim? No, they're not. No, they are not. I'm not saying it's okay to interpret. I'm saying that is historically the standard. I would say that it is right. I would say that it is prejudiced and possibly discriminatory to interpret someone's race by the name they are given. Right? Racism is different than having prejudice or discrimination. Right? So if I'm prejudiced and I'm a bigot, that is different from being racist. Except that that's not always the case. So I want my slaw. Listen, they actually address that in this study. They actually address that in this study. And that is not always the case. There is no evidence that proves, for example, Black perpetrators give them higher ratings than white perpetrators do. Yes, they are identified. Yes, they are. So I'm going to move on because, see, this is not a debate about racism. No, they're on YouTube, Mindy B. They're on YouTube. So listen, this is the reality, folks. Okay. So this is about this study and about why we are having this discussion. Why, yeah, they're on YouTube. So this is why I said people shouldn't use the comparison between Gabby and other folks, right? I had my Facebookers confused. I'm sorry, y'all. So yeah. All right. So, but people have started to use this Gabby story as, yeah, I'm on other platforms too. So this is on Facebook, it's on YouTube, and it's on Twitch. But people were making this comparison between Gabby and everything else, and I've said and I'm still saying she's not the best example to use, right? Period. But what we are going to talk about, the fact is that missing white woman syndrome is a thing, and the studies say so, and not just one study, but multiple studies. Study after study after study shows that missing white woman syndrome is a thing. Okay. So I'm going to keep going because, like I said, there's a lot to cover, and we're halfway through the daggone thing already. We looking for this lady. I know. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot on there, Mindy. There's a lot over there. Some of it I was ignoring. Oh, Loretta, I don't know why it keeps kicking you out. I really don't. Okay, so listen. So we're looking at the intersectionality of this of missing white woman syndrome, right? And it's the idea that members of multiple historically marginalized groups are subject to a unique type of subordination. No, not you, want my slaw, not you. So listen. So for example, Black women are members of both a marginalized racial group and a marginalized gender group. Okay. So crucially, though, Black women have an intersectional experience that is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, right? So, Deborah, I didn't ignore you. That is your white fragility. I literally addressed you, sweetheart. Bless your heart. You weren't being ignored. I actually acknowledged you. I can stop though. Gonna keep going. So, in other words, like white women, right? Black women are subject to sexism. What I actually think is that Deborah is the other person on a different profile, but I'm okay with that. Right. So these studies right here, Missy, these studies go all the way back. But these are done from 2013 to 2014, I believe. And this one is from Northwestern Law. There's another one from 2019 as well. Okay. So I'm going to keep going. I want to can I get to the meat of it though? Because there's a lot that I printed out, but I just don't want to keep going too far. I want to get to the actual meat. No, I'm independent media. Independent. My own. Let me see. Okay, so listen to this part. I want to make sure that I get to these part. Okay, so listen. So some people have argued that the tone of media coverage of Black female victims differs and that these women are more likely to be blamed for purportedly putting themselves in harm's way, either knowingly or unknowingly. Victim blaming in this context suggests that these victims are not only less innocent, but also less worthy of rescue, right? Other observers lament the lack of publicity given to Black female victims of police brutality, attributing the silence to a tradition of sexism and patriarchy in both the Black community and American society at large. So if you take a somewhat different approach, right, Grabe, which is another studier, hypothesizes that white women, and particularly, I want my slaw, this is what you were talking about, and particularly young and wealthy white women are disproportionately highlighted in the news as crime victims because of their status, get this, as the biggest competition in the workplace for white men. She suggests that by consistently portraying white women as victims of crime, especially of crime occurring in places of employment, opportunities as men, in places of employment, they might be deterred from seeking the same employment opportunities as men because of the perceived dangers of the workplace. As a result, the news stories serve as a reinforcing mechanism for a gender hierarchy, right, with men at the top. This is really, this study was really interesting because, like I said, it looked at not just race, but also gender. So the first professor, Bonilla Silva, that we talked about, and then Professor Yvonne Jukes, on the other hand, both hypothesize that coverage disparities are the result of determinations of what or who is and is not newsworthy, right? So as part of that determination in the Canadian context, researchers have described how Aboriginal women are positioned in the lowest rungs of the social order, which we see that in America with the missing and murdered Indigenous women that we have, right? Right, Missy, I found it very interesting. So it says Canadian media ignores crimes against them, right? So I'm going to go on. So what they all agree is that disproportionate news coverage of cases involving the victimization of certain types of women reinforces a social hierarchy by suggesting that those women are innocent, valuable, and worth saving. She also describes how those disparities reflect the strand of intersectional thought that argues that women are often categorized into a simple dichotomy of good or bad based on how well they fit into societal gender norms. Now, this part right here is fascinating for me because if you think about a lot of the stuff that we find with our missing and our murdered transgender individuals right now, especially Black transgenders, right? We end up talking about, this is interesting to me because listen to what they said. I'm going to go back and read this sentence again. It says, she also describes how those disparities reflect the strand of intersectional thought that argues that women are often categorized into a simple dichotomy of quote unquote good or quote unquote bad based on how well they fit societal gender norms. Predictably, white women are traditionally more likely to be placed in the quote unquote good category, which is reflected in their overrepresentation as crime victims in the news. So, in short, no. I'm talking about transgender today, not from 2000. So 2000 to 2004 was the Scripps-Howard study. It was one of the studies referenced in this study. But if you think about that statement and you think about how currently today we have a lot of transgender individuals who are missing, murdered, and you do not see them covered in the news at all, that statement about being classified as good or bad based on how well you fit into societal gender norms makes a lot of sense. Am I making sense? Did I clear that up? What I'm stating is that this statement from this study, right, being applied to what we see today, right. Thank you, Linda. You're with me. Okay, cool. All right. Gonna keep going. You know, this is what's funny is I always know when I'm gonna like upset some folks, and that's okay, right? You'll remember this live, and I'm good with that. Okay, so listen to this. It says, in short, this is what it says. In short, many of the theories explaining race and gender-based disparities in news coverage of crime assert that the disparities both reflect and reinforce social hierarchies. Okay? Women and girls are more readily accepted as victims that need saving, right? The damsel in distress. And white women and girls in particular are more easily seen as, quote, universal victims with whom all viewers and readers can identify. Their outsized presence in the news as crime victims implies that they are inherently good and innocent. Conversely, the lack of media attention trained on victims of color denotes that their lives are less valuable and less of a priority for rescue. This intersectional toolkit helps to more fully explain and contextualize the missing white woman syndrome, and it can be used to help situate the findings of the study. Okay, now they talk to you a lot about the data of this. Yeah, well, and you know, so like, and you're right. So like, this is what we're talking about. The idea of does looks. They mentioned that in the study. That's why I gave you the link to the study, right? Thank you, Missy. Yes. So they actually mentioned towards the end of the study some additional things that may play a role, because in studies you can't look at every possible thing, right? You have to look at, like, you have to be focused. And so they were focusing specifically on gender and on race for this particular study. But they talk about at the end, could things like attractiveness and beauty standards play a role? Could things like classism, and does classism play a role? I think that we would all agree, of course it does. The wealthier someone is, the more people are interested in what happens to them, right? They also mentioned things like, you know, are white women, you know, somehow more likely to find themselves in situations of unusual abductions or unusual missing, you know, whatever. And is that part of the reason? Like, they talk about some of those other possibilities, but you know, the fact that it's doubtful that they would account for the disproportionate numbers that you're about to see. Okay. Now, in this study, one of the things that I like is that they used one national news outlet and they used 4 like regional outlets. So they looked at CNN because it's continuously listed as one of the top 2 sites for traction. They also looked at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and they looked at the Chicago Tribune and the Minneapolis Star. And the reason why they picked these media outlets to look at is because they wanted to look at really what it would look like on a national and regional level all together. Because y'all know most national news agencies tell the same stories, right? They just pick them up from each other. And so you're going to see the same thing. If you get 1 or 2 national media outlets, you're going to see the same stories on all their sites, right? They're very rarely that they're covering something that the other one's not covering. But then when you get into regional populations, it was different. So when they looked at, one of the reasons they wanted to pick up Chicago and Minneapolis is because from a population standpoint, they're very similar, but from demographics, Minneapolis has way more white people than Chicago does, right? And then Atlanta is a completely different makeup from those two, and with a different personality and a different culture, being in the South, but they have a large proportion of Black people. So they picked these 4 news outlets to look at the numbers. And here's what's crazy. So they were looking at this data, and they looked at the racial composition of individuals in the media and in the FBI numbers, because they actually requested statistics from the FBI, and the FBI broke them down for them. Okay. And so check this out. Here's what's crazy. I want to point this out, because we're going to look at 2 things. We're going to look at individuals that are mentioned in the media versus the number of articles in the media. And the numbers get really crazy when we shift gears. And because remember, it's not just, did you make it to the news media? It's how intense was the coverage about you? Did you get 1 article written about you because you were missing? Or did you get 15? Or did you get 6 days worth? Or what happened? You know what I mean? And so that's what they're looking at. Okay. So if you look at the racial composition of individuals in the media and FBI populations, here's what you will find is under the race category, you've got Black, Hispanic, white, and other. Remember that the FBI includes Hispanic in their white numbers. Okay. I just want you to remember that. So it kind of throws their data off a little bit, but in the media, the number of individuals in the media was 22.97%. So not quite 93%, 23%, which was 85 people, right? But the percentage that they made of the FBI statistics was 35.25%. So 35.25% of the FBI's database of missing people, which was like not quite 90,000, it was, I believe it was 84,000, right? I'm not on my YouTube, and I don't know if can I do it from here? Let me see. Oh, I can. Thanks. I want my slaw. I was too busy reading. They're blocked. All done. All good. You know, but racism doesn't exist, y'all. No, somebody just popped up in my live typing out niggers, but racism isn't here. No, surely not. Fuck out of here. Okay, so anyway, 84,000 missing people during this time for this study, and of those, 35.25% were Black by the FBI standards. It was 27,797, but only 85 of them were actually mentioned in the media. So there were only 370 that made it to the media period. So let me paint that picture for you. There were 78,846 in these FBI numbers for this table. There were 370 of them that made it to the media. Of those 370, only 85, 23% were Black. But they made up 35% of the FBI numbers. Okay? So that's a big difference between 35% and 23%, right? I'm rounding. For whites, the number was 47,560 in the FBI's number, which was 60.32%. 60.32%. And white people in the media was 60.54%, 224. So like it made 60%. I'm aware the media is a business. I'm aware of that. Absolutely, I am. I don't think in anywhere that I've said that it is not. I'm talking about what drives it, though, because let me just say this. The media is driven by the people, right? So if the people responded differently to what's displayed in the media would change. They would change what they show. The media gives us what we ask for. And that is why this study is taking a look at it saying, okay, so why is it that we respond the way we do to young missing blonde white girls who are affluent? Why is that? And the study is saying, well, because they look like universal beings. It's because we've been programmed a certain way, because the default has been that people are white people. So that's what it's looking at. So like, you can't just say, oh, well, the media is a business and that's the problem. No, the media's response, just like your social media responds to you as an algorithm, so does the regular media. So, but here's what is interesting. So listen, the racial composition of individuals in media and the FBI, here's the difference. 60% of the racial composition of of media stories were white people. And 60% of FBI numbers was white people, right? 35% of the missing people in the FBI's database were black, but only 22.97, 23% were black. Right? So now we're going to look at what's the race of the individuals across each media source. And here is where some of you might be surprised. So the Atlanta Journal Constitution, 23.66% said they have two outlets. AJC does. And so when you combine them together, like their numbers are, they drop dramatically. But 23.66%, right? White is 63.44% for them. And their other outlet, it's 16.88% black and 71.43% is white, right? So they're hanging right at 57% on average white. Okay. So, and about 18% on average black. Okay. The Chicago Tribune, 35% was black. How much was the FBI percentage? 35. And 39% was white, because guess what? They covered 21% that were Hispanic. So if I add those two together, right, the 21 and the 39%, I come up with roughly 60% that's white. Well, that's what the FBI says, because remember, the FBI includes Hispanic in their white numbers. Does that make sense? Okay. CNN. CNN this is so funny because everybody always thinks CNN's the damn leftist devil, right? CNN, the percentage of black people, the black race of the black individuals, 14.14%. 14.14%. CNN, you suck. The percentage of white people that made it in their across their media, 73.74%. Minneapolis Star, even worse. If they are identified as Hispanic, the FBI database considers Hispanic as white. It does not separate them out yet, or at least it didn't at the time of this study. Like when they check their boxes, there's not a box for dark skin and light skin Hispanic, you know? So the Minneapolis Star, the percentage of black people that individuals across their medium source was 10.48%, right? So 10.5%. Their percentage of white was 72.38%. Their percentage of Hispanic was 9.52%, right? So predominantly CNN and Minneapolis Star were white and Hispanic, and predominantly white, right? With over 70% for both of them. So that's just if you made it to the news. That's just if you made it to a news story, how many of those people are white? And we haven't even gotten into gender yet, okay? I know it's a lot of information. That's why I gave you guys the link to the article. But let me keep going. So now they're looking at the gender of those individuals, okay? So get this. The female, the composition of individuals that were in the media versus what was in the FBI database. So 56.11% of the people in the media as victims of being abducted or perpetrated. Right, Jennifer. Thank you. Always happens. There's never a box. Right. And you know what? I had a friend of mine who's Native American. She just went somewhere the other day and was filling out some governmental stuff. They didn't have a box for her either. So listen. So female was 56% of the victims, the individuals in the media. But they only made up 48.48% of the FBI numbers. So they were 8% higher in the media than they were as actual victims in the FBI database. Right? I don't know if her box, I don't think there is an other box anymore on some documents, right? So then, and for males, Males, get this, the males were only represented not quite 44%, it's 43.89%, but the FBI numbers was 51.52%. So what happens there is that the media is reporting on more females than males. So it may be that individual, like, it's not that's more people. It's more times that a white individual is mentioned versus a black individual, or female individual versus male individual. So out of the same number, so keep in mind, there were 84,131 people in the FBI database for this table. Okay. Of those that made it to the media, it was 442. Of those 442, 56% of them were female stories. Not always. Not always. It's not always more females that go missing. Not always. And that's why we're talking about this gender, this place where gender and race intersect. Because listen to this. We would think that women go missing more often because men aren't put in the news that they go missing, right? Men are supposed to be tough. Why we don't hear about men getting raped? We don't hear about, you know what I mean? So we have to look at the way that the picture that the media paints for us. So out of 84,131 individuals that went missing during this time, 43,348 were men and 40,783 were women. But we heard about 248 women versus 194 men. Right, Linda, we're going to get into that in just a second. We're going to combine these numbers and you're going to see how they change. And I got to hurry up because we're running out of time. So listen to this. It breaks it down. If you look at the link that I gave you, right? If you give a link that I gave you, it's page 300. That link that I gave you, on page 300, they actually put it all together. So you can look and see, this is race and gender composition of individuals in media data, right? You can see Black females, 14.32%, Black males, 8.65%, Hispanic females, 5.95%, Hispanic males, 6.49%. But look at white females and white males. How much more of the media they are represented in when they are victims of abduction and they go missing? Almost 33%. So 1 out of every 3 news stories about abduction and going missing is going to be a white female. And 28% almost is going to be a white male. So if I take just those 2 numbers, 33 and 28 almost, right? And I put them together, that means over half of every missing news story, 2 out of 3 is going to be a white male or a white female, and the rest of us just don't damn matter. Exactly, Leslie. It helps. And so we talked about that earlier. We talked about it feeds into the damsel in distress, right? And how feeding these news stories keeps societal hierarchies in place, both in gender and in race. It is crazy. It is ridiculous, right? Let me keep getting through this real quick so that we can get finished. Because this talks about the intensity, okay? This talks about the intensity. So the first part was the number of individuals that made it in. But now we want to look at, okay, so you got 1 news story or you got 6, right? You know? And so this is where it gets real crazy. So coverage intensity is, it's where the race of the article subjects as compared to the population. So it's what's the race of the article, not just the race of the individual. Got it? Right, Melanie. Yes. So in these numbers, in the FBI database, there were 78,846. In the media, there was 1,540, because remember, this may be the same person getting mentioned multiple times, right? So what was the race of these articles about missing or abducted people, right? I gave you the study. I'm going to put the link in here one more time, guys. This is it's from the Northwestern Law, right? And this was an empirical study that was done. And it references a whole bunch of other studies along with this one. But I'm going to give you the article one more time. And I'm also going to give you this one because I'm not going to have time to go over it tonight. This is another one from William and Mary, Journal of Race, Gender, and Social Justice, right? And this one is called, this one's from April 2019. I read it as well, but I don't have time to cover it tonight. So here's this other study as well for you guys. Hopefully those help. You can watch them when I'm done. But so when you use, so get this, remember the number for Black individuals in the media was just shy of, no, I mean race of the victim in the article. So follow me. The person in the article might be one person and they might get one article, right? But the race of the person in the article, because it might be 5 articles for the same person. So the numbers that I just gave you were for the individual race, right? This is the race of the individuals in the article, which could be the same individual mentioned on 5 different articles, if that makes sense, okay? So here's the difference. Remember, we talked about the percentage of Black individuals mentioned in the media was 22.97%, right? When we look at the percentage of the articles, it drops from 22.97% to 12.73%. That's cut in half, damn near. The percentage of whites, though, went up. It went up from, hold on, what was it, 60? Yeah, from 60.54%, which is that number that's up on top, right? It went up from 60.54% to, look, 67.73%. See that? And the Black went down to 12.73%. So not only are we lacking in Black individuals even making it into news stories, but when we look at the intensity of the coverage, it drops almost in half. And white people get even more coverage because they get, not only do they make it in by significantly higher numbers, right? The intensity of their coverage increases. The other article, the second article that I gave you from William and Mary, talks about why this is so dangerous for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, and why legislation needs to be enacted to correct this, because it is dangerous for us. So make sure you check that article out as well. It breaks it down by news category again, but I'm not going to go into that. And here's the other thing. In terms of, now we're going to look at it from a gender perspective. So when you look at the gender of the article subjects, not just the gender of the individuals, but the legislation for actual, you have to read the whole thing. Don't get me sidebarred. So listen. So listen right here. So when you look at the gender of the article of the subjects instead of just the gender of the individuals, right? The number of females, which we just looked at, was, see, I done picked up my papers. So the females before were 56.11%, right? That number jumped from 56.11% at the top to 73.36%. 73% of the articles that you read are about women being abducted and going missing, even though they only account for 48%. But 73% of the articles that you read make you think that, when actually more men go missing than women. And the males, they go from 43.89% to being 26.64% of the articles. They're a quarter of the articles, even though they make up half of the people. They make up 51% of the people being abducted. It's almost equal. But you only hear of them 1/4 of the time. Right. It lowers rescue percentages. And that's why she was saying in the second study that I put up that there needs to be legislation around this, because it impacts the resources that are used to attempt to rescue people of color. Correct. So real quick, I'm going to sum this up for you guys. So here we go. This is the gender. Yeah. For this particular study, for this group of time, yes, that's true. They were almost 50-50. It was almost 50-50, which that doesn't really surprise me. I want my slaw, because if you think about the homeless population, there's a significant more number of males, that are homeless than females. Like, it doesn't surprise me. But let me keep going. So listen, so the gender composition of article subjects. Remember the one that I showed you before where y'all freaked out and you were like, holy crap. And we had white women sitting at like, I don't know, 30% and white men just under that. Y'all, I done put my right here, this one. So this was the racial makeup of individuals, right? White females. And this is in media data. Now this is in the article. So this is the intensity of the news coverage that you're looking at. That number goes from 32.97% to 49.74%. 50% of the article subjects in media are white females. That is why we talk about the value of the white woman and how it is perpetuated in the media and how it is very detrimental for women of color. Okay, let me wind this down because we're going to go over by just a few minutes, but I don't want to do this. That is terrifying, right? I know. It is absolutely terrifying. And I don't have time to go through all of this, but I just want to end. Hold on. I'm going to give you the conclusion, okay? Yeah, it's crazy, but it's sad because we think what we think because it's what we're fed in the media, right? It's not really the true numbers. And you gotta ask yourself, well, why is this? And that's when I go back to the beginning of this, when we talk about, media being set up to reinforce social hierarchies, from racial hierarchies to gender hierarchies, and things like that. And then you start to look at, well, who owns the medias? Who owns the media outlets, right? It's like, what, 5 or 6 companies that owns all of them? I don't think that that's necessarily true. Because, okay, if you reinforce a social hierarchy structure, you are making money. If you reinforce if you reinforce a patriarchal hierarchy and you reinforce a white supremacist hierarchy, right, in this country, then by default, you do make money. Period. You do make money, because who's running the news media outlets? White males. People won't like that, but that's a fact, right? So here we go. I'm going to keep going, right? And this is what I'm saying. So these are the things that we have to be using to change. So that's why when people go, oh, like y'all saw, if y'all didn't see, if you go to YouTube, you'll see all the names I was being called tonight for doing this broadcast, which is nothing new. I was called a bunch of them last year and earlier this year and whatever, right? But the bottom line is, this is the truth. Jody, I covered that very briefly in the very beginning. And what I stated about that is that I'm still waiting to talk to Micah's parents and a couple of other people. And until I do all of that, I'm not gonna speak on all of it, because there's just a lot of stuff being spewed everywhere. And I want to make sure that when I do cover it in detail, and so maybe that will be Thursday. So let me give it to you in conclusion so that I can get off of here, okay? So It says this study takes a major step toward filling 4 major holes in the relevant literatures, right? First, it uses both national and local data to establish grounds for the claim that missing white woman syndrome is an empirical fact for abductees of all ages, right? Second, it emphasizes an intersectional approach to the issue of crime and the media between race and gender, right? I've texted his mom already because his aunt reached out to me. So they've got a lot going on because they have an illness in the family and stuff as well. So she knows to hit me back. They reached out to me, so I'm just going to let them reach out to me when they have time. Third, it extends the literature on the nexus of violent crime and the media to the internet age by scraping data from online news sources. And fourth, it considers not only the issue of which individuals receive news coverage, but also the disparities in coverage intensity, right? So the bottom line is when you look at the data is clear and supports the theory of missing white woman syndrome, right? It highlights disparities in the number of men who make it to news media outlets when they are abducted or they go missing. It highlights the disparity between Black women and white women, Hispanic women and white women, any other women but white women. It highlights those disparities. And it shows you that predominantly over 50% of the times that you hear of an individual who's been abducted or who has gone missing, they are white. They're either going to be a white male or a white female. And that 70 some percentage of the intensity of that coverage is going to be for a white female over everyone else, right? You feel like you're in the middle of in one of your college sociology classes. Yeah. I heard a local politician back home for Sullivan County say nothing good ever came out of academia, and that all these ideas about, you know, racial equity and all these other things, all these other ideas that have come out of academia is including critical race theory and multiculturalism and cultural equity. All of these things are just not good. You want to take a guess at what state representative that was talking out of both sides of his damn neck at Higher Ground Baptist Church? I'm going to play that clip for you guys. I have it. When I heard him say it, I was like, but anyway, yeah, these are the facts. So while I don't agree that Gabby's story was the best story to use to draw comparisons, it's important to know that the comparisons are legitimate, that white woman syndrome is a thing, that the empirical data supports that it's a thing, not just nationally, but regionally. And that is dangerous for women of color, for Black, brown, Indigenous women of color, men of color. That is very dangerous, right? It creates a society that is not interested when something happens to us, and very few resources are made available to go looking for us. And that's scary. So hopefully everyone understands. I apologize for some of the trolls that came from YouTube today. You guys got a little bit of a taste of what I get in my inbox, right? Y'all saw how many names I was called tonight. You know what? For me, whether she was an angel or not isn't even relevant. No one deserves to die, right? So for me, that doesn't infuriate me, right? It doesn't infuriate me. What infuriates me is that there was so much time and resources spent on her that weren't for other people. And I'm not saying that I wish they weren't spent for her. I'm saying I wish they were spent for other people equally, if that makes sense. You know, there's a Black man right now, Black boy, he's a young Black man who's studying, I think, geology, who went missing June or July, shortly before her, out in the desert, leaving his job, doing geologist work. And he hasn't been found. and there's not near the same, there's not nearly the same attention or interest in the fact that he's been missing. And, you know, right, equity should extend to the media. Yes, agreed. And, you know, I'm just not a fan of, so like saying things like, I think the media is upset that they found her. To me, like, that's just a baseless claim. There's nothing to justify that, right? That's just your opinion with nothing to back it up. You know, do I think that everyone in the media is some vulture that's just like, they don't care about people being dead or whatever? I don't think that. I think that they are a business. And to be quite frank, we are not lacking, unfortunately, we are not lacking in horrible cases to cover. We are not lacking in horrible events to be able to cover, to quote unquote milk them, as you say, right? So I don't think that they're upset that she's found. I think they ran their news cycle on it, and they'll go on and find something else. And I think that people will be there to read and watch what they want, and reinforce the behaviors that the media currently has, right? In my opinion, you know, we need the FTC to come in and break up a lot of these monopolies when it comes to the media. I believe that that's the same thing when it comes to social media. That's the same thing when it comes to technology. Some of these technology giants, media companies, they have a lot of influence on people. And I think that we have to do a better job. You know, we have got to, so there's this thing about, you know, capitalism. I'm all good with capitalism until it becomes a monopoly, and I'm all good with capitalism until it comes at the expense of people's rights and people's freedoms and all of that. And people have to understand that that's what's happening in a lot of different ways. And so, you know, I think there's a problem when Facebook owns Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, and Google owns YouTube and Google and whatever else. And, you know, and like they just dip their hands in pockets and everything else. And then you're fed the same stuff from the same places. And, you know, social media right now is what's making a difference. And I don't mean the social media platforms. I mean the people using social media, right? How we use. So when people say social media is the devil, I say you're full of shit, right? No, social media is not the devil. It's how you use it, because it serves you what you ask for. That's the way the algorithm is built. It gives you what you ask for. So if what you see isn't pleasing to you, then maybe you might want to hold the mirror up, because your social media is a reflection of you. Just saying. So maybe that's the least pleasant thing I've said all night. But anyway, all right. Hopefully this information was helpful. I did give you 2 links to 2 of the studies that we covered tonight. I know it was a lot of data and a lot of information, but it's information that's necessary and it's good. And, you know, right, Jamie. So you could stop seeing him. Yeah, I laugh because sometimes Facebook will get it wrong, and they'll show me like a story about Ballad, or like Ballad is hiring, and I'm like, no, you got it confused, algorithm. You got it confused. I don't want to work for them. You're welcome. I'm glad you made it to Alive, Linda. I will see you guys again Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Y'all take care of yourselves. Be amazing. Be light. Be love. Peace.